We're heading back to the southern border now, where News Nation's Jorge Ventura is standing by for us. And Jorge, we are hearing of a new threat by Mexican cartels tonight.
In Tamaulipas, Mexico, that sits right across the Rio Grande Valley. Every single day, thousands of Texans cross over to the border to visit.
Cartels are placing explosives on the roads going in and out of the Texas border. The Texas-Mexico border is a battleground. Warnings issued from an infamous drug lord are being issued, and the message is clear. Don't make us mad. With the recent election of President Donald Trump, we have seen tensions between the U.S. and the violent gangs of Mexico come to a head. However, with the unyielding power of us breathing down its neck, can the infamous drug lord El Mencho keep his cool, and are these warnings for real? Or is he bluffing? Mass killings, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and everything in between. The CJNG has committed every crime under the sun, and thousands of people have lost their lives because of their cruelty. And at the head of all this violence is one of the world's cruelest men, El Mencho. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, emerged in the early 2010 as an offshoot of the Sinaloa Cartel. Following the death of Ignacio Nacho Coronel in 2010, his followers split off and became the CJNG under El Mencho's leadership. The CJNG quickly became one of Mexico's most powerful and violent criminal organizations, specializing in the drug trade. The cartel is infamous for its military-style operations, advanced weaponry, and brutal enforcement tactics. You do not mess with the CJNG. That is a simple fact. I know it's easy to talk big, but let me put them into perspective. They were behind the 2011 Veracruz massacres, 35 mutilated bodies being dumped in the streets of Veracruz. The victims were members of a rival gang. They committed the 2015 Jalisco ambush, where in April of that year, they ambushed a police convoy in Jalisco, gunned down 15 state police officers, and injured many more people. The attack was highly coordinated and efficient. This wasn't an ambush, it was a massacre. In 2020, they assassinated Mexico City's police chief, the police chief of Mexico's most well-armed and best-trained branch of the police force, who was killed despite his security. They are more than ready to take out and defend their territory if needed. And time again, they have killed horrifying numbers of people to further their goals. Unlike other cartels, the CJNG are notorious for their violence, often using terror tactics and horrifically violent displays to make their authority clear. Of Mexico makes them one of the most militant and well-armed cartels in Mexico.
Strict do not travel warning now from the U.S. to parts of Mexico.
The U.S. State Department issued the travel warning because of increased violent crime in some areas.
In January 2025, the U.S. Department of State issued a Level 4 do not travel advisory for several Mexican border towns near Texas. The advisory specifically warned U.S. citizens against visiting these areas due to the increasing risks of gun battles, improvised explosives, kidnapping, and targeted attacks on U.S. civilians. Recent intelligence reports indicate that powerful crime organizations, primarily the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and the Gulf Cartel, have intensified their violent gang warfare over key smuggling routes along the U.S.-Mexico border. As you know, the CJNG isn't afraid to use its military might to stamp down on the military and anyone who would want to get in the way of their cartel operations. This willingness to challenge U.S. authorities was later confirmed as reports surfaced detailing how the CJNG and other criminal organizations have begun actively resisting the increasingly strict border enforcement measures implemented during the Trump administration. These cartels, faced with heightened surveillance, reinforced border security, and aggressive anti-smuggling operations, have responded with escalating violence, targeting both Mexican and U.S. law enforcement personnel. To protect their lucrative smuggling routes, cartels have adopted more sophisticated tactics, from using high-powered weapons against authorities to constructing elaborate tunnels and deploying drones for surveillance and drug transport. Reports indicate that clashes between cartel members and border enforcement units have become more frequent, further straining diplomatic relations between the US and Mexico. These developments not only underscore the growing boldness of cartels in directly confronting law enforcement, but also highlight the increasing risks faced by US personnel operating near the border. Border Patrol agents, DEA officers, and other federal agencies working to curb drug and human trafficking are now dealing with an adversary that is more organized, heavily armed, and unafraid to use violence to maintain control over their operations. As the cartel war spills closer to the US border, concerns continue to rise about the potential for cross-border violence and the security implications for both nations. But it's also already ready to face the might of US border security forces. This willingness to engage in violence and confrontations will put the safety of those crossing the border at serious risk because they, along with Border Patrol themselves, will likely either be caught in the gunfire between the CJNG and other gangs, or they will be intentionally singled out and killed. Not only that, but this conflict and war with the CJNG could potentially do a lot to limit how the border between the two countries could be handled. This could make operations slower and less safe for everyone because of the gangs and their violent disruptions. Aside from its effects on the border, I'll try and make a few guesses as to what will happen in the future based on the information we have. Given the escalation of violence between the gang and the border control, I would think two things could happen. The CJNG eventually gets outgunned and outmanned, and they are put down. Or the CJNG can take control of the Texan border and pass drugs through the border without contest. If the CJNG is cursed, I could likely see a lot of the conflict in the drug world erupting into a war to fill the CJNG's place, fueling further violence and conflict. Along with this, it's likely that if the CJNG is crushed under Trump's administration, it might be likely that Trump will use this win as some kind of political victory. If the CJNG can take control of the border, or at least stifle it significantly, they'll likely be able to smuggle drugs through the border without too much resistance. If they did that, then I could reasonably see that they'd be able to become much more powerful than they already are, and with that, they could likely use this to turn into influential players within the Mexican cartels. This would also be a massive blow to Trump and his administration, because if the CJNG can claim the border for themselves, then that would likely make Trump look incompetent at dealing with terrorists. However, because the CJNG and its practices have the potential to cause damage to Trump and his reputation, it's likely that if the time calls, Trump will summon more than enough firepower to resecure the border and forcibly stabilize the situation so that people can once again pass the border freely. As tensions continue to rise, the battle for control over the Texas-Mexico border is far from over. The CJNG, a cartel notorious for its brutality and military precision, has made it clear that it will not back down without a fight. With explosives now being used to deter border security forces and clashes between cartels and US authorities becoming more frequent, the situation is escalating into a full-scale conflict. The question now is not whether the US will respond, but how far Trump's administration is willing to go to regain control. Will the full force of the US military be deployed to crush the cartel's operations, setting off a new era of drug war escalation? Or will the CJNG's sheer firepower and strategic cunning allow it to carve out an uncontested smuggling corridor, further solidifying its dominance in the criminal underworld? One thing is certain: whatever happens next will shape the future of US-Mexico border security, the global drug trade, and the legacy of Trump's presidency. The war is already here. The only question is, who will win?